All right. So I've been starting to think through this idea of making primers for this. Walkaway primers. One of the key things you have to understand once you do this, you can never go back. They won't take you back. You've embraced everything that they could possibly hate, but what really it is, you found out they're phonies. You found out they're unknowledgeable. They're really actually that a lot of the ideas of the left are really kind of weird and shallow. There's this idea they're trying to make people share. But when you've been a Democrat, when you've been around progressives, when you know a lot of these are people that they don't necessarily make good choices. So they end up in some bad situations. And so it's kind of like, well, I mean, I get why you would want people to share. Now, also, one of the most important things, there's two things I was thinking of historically, and when you walk away, these are two things that they don't seem to be important, so you would never look them up. Have you ever wondered, number one, have you ever wondered what is the deal with buildings like the Odd Fellows, or like why your grandpa was a Freemason? But like not really, like there was nothing creepy, you know, it doesn't, maybe even you've had a conversation with somebody who like, they're like a Freemason or something. And you're like, this just seemed like a bunch of old guys who like do charity work. Well, at one time, that's how the poor were fed. That's how like whole parts of downtowns got built. Is that there was that's what organizations of men did. This is very important that people get like how demonizing fraternities and men's organizations have actually ruined the ability for our society to be legitimately creative. And now we have these kind of fake collectives of shallow political ideologies and like that are based off of like spurious claims from academics, and that, you know, this is fundamentally some ideology you're clinging to as an anti-racist because of the fundamental bedrock of society is racism. So you're like some mystic going against the grain in this regard. It's not, yeah. So it's really kind of it's actually the anti-social social club, which I think it's really funny that that's like a brand. People wear that and it's a brand and it's supposed to show like, yeah, dog, I'm anti-social. Don't mess around with me. I have tattoos. I'm anti-social. I have face piercings. I'm anti-social, broham. So, I like how for us who are older, before you could afford full sleeves, before people could afford all this shit in their head, you know, it's just like, there were some tough niggas out there, blood. Tough motherfuckers. There are men who just, they just were intimidating motherfuckers. And you look at these pictures of the OGs. These niggas had pipes full of steam. Pipes full of fucking steam. You look at the pictures of like the old OG like gangsters. You're just like, style, and it looked like these fools could scrap, man. You know, and so, okay. So, how did an entire society suddenly turn on one group and decide to kill them? Well, what it was that there was fundamentally the first use of the computer by the German government under Hitler, first to make sure that there was an extremely accurate census. But this would also include the various organizations you were a part of, This is how fundamentally an intelligence apparatus, an internal intelligence apparatus was established. But one would think what they just came up with this. No. Actually, this plan was devised with the help of an American corporation called Hollerith. And the machine called the Hollerith machine. The Hollerith machine was the first use, big time use of a computer under any government. It was of course considered, being that the government at the time was a technocratic socialist government that was modernist in its nature. People thought, giving the government all of the information about my ancestry, what could go wrong? We found out went horribly wrong in Germany when everyone did that. So, the Hollerith machine eventually becomes the key machine of IBM after the war. That's the rest of the story. If you go to Yad Vashem Museum in, believe it's Tel Aviv, you will see, yeah, right? Yeah, it was Tel Aviv. Wait, was that the visit to Jerusalem or Tel Aviv? Tel Aviv, yeah. As we passed in front of the Knesset at some point. It was a long time ago. And so, yeah, and the capital had not been moved to Jerusalem, yeah. And so, so Yad Vashem Museum, you would see the Hollerith machine. Now, I don't recall seeing the Hollerith machine. I have since seen photos of its placement in Yad Vashem. Mostly because there's a guy who wrote a book called Hitler and, or Nazis and, or IBM and the Holocaust, actually. So is Edwin Black. Edwin Black has done fantastic work on really kind of exposing sort of the parts about World War II that everybody's uncomfortable with. Like the deal Jews made with Hitler's government to move a bunch of them, a few 100,000, to the British-Palestinian Transjordan mandate. And there was a whole thing about how to move money and the cut that the Nazis were going to take of all the Jews' money that would get moved out of the country by Simon Cohen. And, yeah, so anyway, there's that, you see, this is so the use of data against people, and then saying, oh, these are just a bunch of data specialists. But what they actually are is the beginning of a brutal regime of intelligence officers that would, dig into your life and find ways of hurting you. Say, like, that man who just got arrested on misdemeanors having to do with January 6th, that they went out of their way to humiliate him. That especially with the Jan 6 people, that this is really starting to show. Because they're trying to get everybody used to the idea of the government just utterly crushing right-wingers, and everybody giggling about it, and everybody thinking it's okay, and everybody acting like, oh, it's fine, because they're horribly dangerous people who don't commit crime against people. Now, you see, we are allowing people to commit crime against women all over the place, but, oh, watch out for those guys. So I was thinking first about the Hollerith machine, and it was like, and I started walking through, like, what are some of the things that, like, when you're on the left, like, this never comes up. Like, no one would ever bring a subject like this up. You would never know about it. And then I thought about let me go back to friendly societies. So you have secret societies of a technocratic megastate. That's why Republicans hate the idea of a humongous government. Is because there were so many guys from World War II who were totally normal dudes. They went back to the farm, they became Republicans, they would have these stories. And one of them was, no, the Nazis had computers, and that's how they found everybody. And no one believed them. Like, really, for decades, this was this weird rumor, if you're my age, this was this rumor that eventually became declassified. Yeah, the Nazis had computers. That's how they found all the people who they wanted to eliminate in society. Because, you see, the same thing was being set up by the Clintons at its fundamental stages when I was in high school, with them getting involved with Silicon Valley and big data at the very beginning of it. That's why they're on the board of directors of Google/Alphabet. That's from what I know. From what I know. So friendly societies. And how did men in friendly societies create everything? Well, what it was a major effort as a part of Protestant Americana to get people over their differences. They formed these organizations of friendly societies that were mutual benefit organizations that had their roots really in British culture and to some degree German culture, continental European, but mostly this was a British thing. This is a thing that can be traced pretty much back to Scotland, really. Hence the book, How the Scottish Created the Modern World, if I remember the book. And so the book's title correctly. So, yeah, these friendly societies, you know, people think of it, oh, they're mystical and they have it. No, they were mostly these things that caused men to network and network with people who created stuff that the world will never forget, such as, who's an example of this? Mozart. Amadeus Mozart. If you saw the movie Amadeus, you would have seen these images of Amadeus's father appearing to be this extremely imposing figure. Amadeus's father was a member of the Strict Observance Lodge, if I remember correctly. And when that fell apart, his father joined this new lodge system that was not exactly a pendant of the Blue Lodge, which is the standard Masonic lodge, but it was another lodge, and it would be called the Lodge of Perfectibilism. Eventually, because that term was rather cumbersome, they came up with the term Illuminatus. And so what they would do is they would form a quote-unquote solus, if I remember correctly, is what they refer to as their circle. That's a very common thing, a circle with a dot in it. in their system's rituals, that's what they represent. So they show when you form a circle, that it's the idea is that it's like the sun. It's like I believe is so it's like a solus. And so a big thing about the Illuminati Lodge was that they were a socio-political concept. They wanted to change society. And so Mozart, if you watched Amadeus, you would have seen Mozart, and I think it's Salvistieri. I'd have Salivieri, I believe his name is. I would have somebody, help me out with that one. That was one of the three brothers. There was three of them, Mozart, Salieri, and then there was somebody else that they were all lodge brothers. And what they were working on was the Philosopher's Stone, the magic flute, and there was going to be another work. It was a great alchemical musical opus, the music that would bear the new age. This is what these were men thinking big with lots of capital B's. And so that's what Mozart and his little bunch were about at that time. And people will give all kinds of, super creepy Masons, but I mean, just no ideas like this had been permitted to exist. You would die if you would have some creepy bureaucratic little priest, like set you up for execution if you had thought stuff like what Mozart and his father had been thinking about how music would change this new type of music, this new approach to music and art would change humanity. So it's important to get this idea of that when you're on, now that you've walked away from the left, you're going to learn all kinds of weird things about history. And a lot of this would have been stuff that there's just no way you could have known it without having to look for it. And you know, it would have been, it's just not possible. You would have never found this information out unless you were in a different milieu than you probably had been. So there ain't nobody who's mad at you for not showing up earlier. Never forget that. You couldn't have known. Welcome to the club. Now you know.